You're listening to 15 Minutes, where we feature community leaders sharing what the rest of us should know but likely don't.
Hello, everyone. Michael Renfro here. I'm the host of 15 Minutes, where we talk with top-notch lawyers and law firms about what it takes to grow a successful law firm and a successful practice. And this episode is brought to you by Gladiator Law Marketing, where we deliver tailor-made services to help you accomplish your objectives and maximize your growth potential. In order to have a successful marketing campaign, you do need to make sure that you're getting the optimum ROI. And part of that is that your firm needs to be better than the competitors, just simply put. At Gladiator, we use artificial intelligence along with machine learning and literally over a century of combined experience now to outperform the competition and do just that. To learn more, please go to gladiatorlawmarketing.com, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen there. So I'm not going to bother spelling it out for you today. Today's guest, Li-Chung Daniel Ho. And Lee, if I remember, you are on the East Coast, right? Or are you on the West?
Oh, actually in Chicago.
Chicago.
Midwest.
Okay, Midwest. And but Lee has been doing, or Dan, Dan has been doing collectively for I think for around the last 25 years, if I remember, Dan, intellectual property in the technological realm. So mainly with technology, but like patents, trademarks, that kind of thing.
So I do started off doing patent, both patent litigation, patent prosecution, and then when I was in a law firm atmosphere, and then I went in-house. And so when I was in-house, I did a mix of things, just like most in-house attorneys. You don't have one responsibility. You start collecting more and more.
Right.
So I did a lot of transactional work when I was there. And then a lot of contracts and things like that. And then I just recently, about 5 years ago, went back to a law firm atmosphere. So I would say I spent probably, bulk of my career doing intellectual properties, but then also when I was in-house, I was involved in other things.
Oh, cool. So how did you get started originally in law? Like in the, how did you go from being Dan, the guy, to Dan, one of the rule knowers?
Yeah, so that's actually kind of interesting story. So every time I tell that, people are like, kind of fascinated about my background. And so I started off actually as an engineer. I went to Michigan, received my bachelor's, undergraduate, and graduate degree in mechanical engineering. And so I worked at Ford Motor Company, first in product planning, wow. And then later on worked in design and release activities. And so basically, we have vendors who does most of the work in terms of the design, but then I would review the specifications and let them know whether this is acceptable and stuff like that. And so when I was working as an engineer, and especially my last job, I was release engineer for truck operations for their steering suspension mechanisms. And then when I was there, it was like every time there's a rollover, every time there's an accident or something like that, they always blame it on the steering suspension. They always blame it, obviously, on the vehicle rather than themselves. Right. And so I started meeting with lawyers quite a bit.
So that's I was kind of thinking it. You kind of ended up being on the other side. So you're like, I really want to learn that side of it.
Exactly. That's what happened. It's actually like, I was, they started going through my documents, all that stuff like that.
You guys have a lot of privileges.
Right. And then actually, like my predecessor who released probably more of this stuff, that was out in the field because I was working more on the newer stuff, obviously, the stuff that's been, out there not that long. But he was telling me he was being deposed a couple times a week.
Wow.
He said that became my full-time
job. That was so it was regular for him. It was part of his regular week at that point.
Right, exactly. He said I was like, he was wow. He said that he was, even though he moved on to a different job, within Ford, he said he was just working all the time in terms of working with attorneys, doing depositions. And at that time, I started getting into that a little bit because they're going through my stuff. And then I always had to sit down with attorneys, products liability attorneys, going through the documents and explain to them what this means and stuff like that. And this is why we did whatever. And then, then some of the attorneys I met with are saying that, you'd be a really good lawyer. Maybe you should think about being a lawyer instead of, staying as an attorney. And
you really argue well, buddy. Like, I'm having a problem getting past you.
Right. And so that was actually kind of interesting. So I was kind of thinking, I think I'd rather be the person that's doing the deposition rather than the one being deposed. And so
absolutely.
And so that's when I decided, I'll go to law school at that point.
So you were in, based on what you've told me, I'm guessing you were in like your early 30s when you went back to law school?
I was 6 years at Ford. So I was probably late 20s, maybe 28 when I 28 when I decided to go to law school.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I was actually, probably one of the older law student when I was here. A lot of people
I would imagine directly
from undergrad to law. But actually, interesting.
But it's not unheard of. I mean, your story, although it's very unique and I love it, I've heard other similar ones where, like these guys have been attorneys for 30 years, but like they had a whole nother life for the first 25, 30 years,
Right, exactly. Especially in my field, in technology and then especially IP, especially, there's a lot of people who first started off as engineers or even like not even IP. I work with transactional attorneys, which they work with as a CPA for a couple of years. And they decided later on, going like, hey, maybe I'll try law school now. And so,
I'll give you an example of somebody that I met. He was Army.
Oh,
and what's not Army, sorry, Marines.
Right.
Marines. And literally this attorney, I won't say his name because, due to anonymity, but his left arm has 23 tattooed skulls. And I'm sure you know what that means because that's the number of kills. But this guy now is both a criminal defense and a personal injury, which is really funny because the fact that he even became attorney to me is a little different in and of itself, right? Because he is a biker. He's like he's part of the 1%ers, like in a big one of those large bike gangs, right? Mm-hmm. So he became a personal injury attorney, but after being that, someone asked him, a criminal defense guy just said, hey, could you take a case for me? Just one case.
Right.
And he ended up doing the case. And he's like, man, after doing that case, I saw how horrible the criminal justice system is. And like, I want to fight it. So now he does both. So you never know, you never know what's going to lead you into, which, when he first told me that he was from the Marines, I was like, so where the heck did becoming a criminal defense? He's like, I didn't even go into being an attorney for criminal defense. I started, for personal injury.
Yeah. So like, initially I went in for going into law thinking I wanted to do products liability because that was what I was familiar with.
Which were you going to do? I'm sorry.
Products liability.
Oh, okay.
That's what I was doing.
Product liability. Absolutely. Yeah, you already know both. You know the other side already.
Right.
So now you would have the advantage of knowing both sides.
Right. Yeah. So I went to, did the products, thought about doing products liability. That's went to law school with that intention. And then I went back to Ford my first summer.
Was this now after you had gotten your law degree?
No, this is when I was in law school.
Oh, so while you were in law school, you went back.
I went back to Ford, and then realized I hated products liability. It was it was boring. The people who does that kind of work. I worked on it a little bit later on when I became a lawyer. When I was at General Block, which is a large law firm here in Chicago. But then when I was at Ford, it was like the most depressing area.
Which vehicles did you do? All vehicles, or did you? I think you said trucks, right? So which trucks? The big ones, the big 18-wheelers?
No. The truck so I worked on light truck.
Okay.
So I worked on like Ranger Bronco 2.
Right. No, I understand now. But I know Ford does make the big ones too, so I didn't know if you worked on.
Yeah. So I worked on the F series, Econoline, not the semi trucks.
Not the semis. Got it.
Within Ford, there's light truck and heavy truck.
Yes.
So that was within light truck I was in.
But you worked, when you say light truck, that covers basically anything that had a bed on it.
Well, that or also like SUVs, basically.
So SUVs fell under the light truck. Okay, cool.
Right.
So like,
and so SUV.
Oh, that's right, because you did say the Explorer, which is an SUV and not a.
Right. Yeah.
So Expeditions, all those.
Explorer because it was
it wasn't around.
It was Bronco 2 back then.
Bronco 2. That's right.
And then
that's what you said, Bronco. I immediately that tells you how old I am, though. I know that a Bronco is an Explorer, so I went to the
Yeah, actually, it was Bronco 2 became Explorer, and Bronco 2
Right.
Broncos became Expeditions. But yeah,
Right.
but then that's like the Bronco 2s were one that's and also the Broncos a lot of because it's a SUV and people drive it like a car.
Yeah, and they roll them.
They try to go around the corner and they roll it over, and so they
Remember the
always blame it
Suzuki?
on the vehicle. But it's like part of it too. It's like you're not. I mean, you're not driving it the way it was intended. But yeah, but that's complete. I mean, we can talk about that for hours.
No, I just curious. Do you remember the Suzuki Sidekick 2 that
Right,
came
exactly.
out?
That
It was like
about the same
25
time.
miles an hour. 25 miles an hour, and you would.
Right. Yeah, it was Suzuki. I think it was worse than even our Bronco 2. It's,
Oh, it was what? That's what I'm saying. I believe at 25, if you took a turn tight, I mean, what you're like 25 is nothing. You should be able to pretty much whip almost any car around, and it would.
Yeah, I mean, but then I mean that's the thing though. I mean, people think that they can drive it like a sports car or something.
Exactly.
Like it's not a Mustang, it's a Bronco too. Yeah,
that's funny.
Yeah.
So, what would you say was your biggest turning point to go? Because and what I mean by that is you sounds like you've had a couple turning points. Number one,
right?
Which one do you think would be the biggest one? That, and you're going to love how I do this, because really I believe question 4 and 5, just so you know, I think kind of go together. Mm-hmm. So I've always kind of put them together. What do you think your biggest turning point is that also created your best milestone, if you will?
Oh, that's an interesting point. I would say, because like you said, I mean, I had my career, changed so much during the last, started off for
sounds like you've had about 3 careers inside of your career.
Exactly. I think that's probably going to be true for a lot of people.
It is for me too. Sir.
There's so many things that happens. Like obviously one is decided to go become an attorney. When I worked as an engineer. But also another thing that happened was that I worked at I started off working in a smaller boutique firm. IP basically. Mm-hmm. So we did strictly patent litigation, patent prosecution kind of work. For people that's not familiar with patent prosecution, people think that it's somehow dealing with like litigation, but then it's actually different. Patent prosecution is writing of the patents, and litigation is litigating the patents. For people that's not familiar.
So it's in this case it was not. I get it.
Yeah, not like prosecution.
No, not like
criminal
the
prosecution.
Right, not the same way.
Yeah, that's the term we use for writing patent applications. So I did wrote patent applications. I did a lot of litigation. I went to a large law firm for a while. Started off a boutique firm. Then I went to Jenner & Block, which is one of the larger litigation firm here in Chicago. And then the turning point for me at that point was that I think maybe a lot of attorneys kind of go through that at a certain point. They're going like especially at a large law firm, working easily like 80 hours a week, and then a couple of times when we're getting into like a case, getting ready for like or arguments, we're getting ready for the briefs and stuff like that. We might be working like 3-4 days straight without sleep and stuff like that. And then at that point, I was coming home. If I'm coming, sometime I would actually stay in the office. I'd be coming home at 11 o'clock at night, and then I was like, at that point I was late 30s, and then I got married a couple years before that, and then we just had a kid,
So brand new family.
Exactly. So that's when you kind of start thinking about saying, like work-life balance, right?
Right. And so I can't keep doing 80 hours a week for the rest
of my life. I can't be doing that, coming home late, and then basically seeing my kid maybe a couple hours during the weekend, and then have to go off to the office. And then that's when you kind of decided saying, it's not, it's kind of fun. I mean, I enjoyed litigation. I mean, it was the challenge, of trying.
Well, you obviously enjoyed the arguing, right? The back and forth.
Right. It's a lot of fun, but then, I mean, I think it's, if I was single, it
might have gone a different way if you didn't fall in love.
Right. And so that's that's what the big change for me was, realizing, saying that, like, hey, maybe it's time to start going as an in-house attorney. So that was very different from a law firm atmosphere. So in-house,
I just want to let people know who don't know, but an in-house is when you become a counsel for a specific company and their in-house attorney, you become their counsel.
Exactly. So yeah. So I know we're kind of throwing out a lot of terms.
No, I just want there's some people that might not put it together. Just want to make sure they get it.
Right. So basically, it's in-house. You work for a company, just like a regular employee. You're a W-2 employee,
right? Except you're just, law.
Same thing. Like just being an engineer. So like going back there, and then it's like I wouldn't say a 9-to-5 job, but then it's much closer to a 9-to-5 job than you will in a law firm.
Yes.
And then and
you don't get to. I would say I'm guessing in-house, it's not quite the same flexible atmosphere. And what I mean by that is, let's face it, if you're in a law firm, as long as you're getting your job done, you can pretty much decide your hours of when you walk into the firm and when you walk out of the firm. Whereas if you're an in-house attorney, they really kind of want you to be there at the same hours as like the other executives and things like that.
Right.
Kind of on hand.
Right. Actually, the thing that was interesting for me was that I decided to take a job, at Accenture, which is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Accenture, but Accenture is a consulting company. And so I was working there, as one of the senior counsel there. And then the way they worked, which worked out great for me, was that, most of their consultants are only in the office once a week, because they're traveling all the time.
Right.
And so they had a deal with the attorneys coming in saying that you only have to be in the office half the time.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I'm able to work at home during that time. But then obviously I have to be available, for.
Right. You're still available.
During the regular work
kind of like the way today right, like the way we work remotely today. You were
exactly.
You were just doing it early.
So yeah, so when we went remote, people, I've been doing that for a while. It's now.
Yeah, me too. I'm right there with you, brother. I've been remote probably. Yeah. I mean, I've had my stints like you where I've gone back into a couple of jobs where it was just the right time, but the bulk of the last 20 years has been working out of the home because I just found it much more productive. Period.
Right. Exactly.
But go ahead.
So, I mean, it was a very interesting transition. I mean, both in terms of the work hours and then
the atmosphere.
So like you said, as long as you get the work done at a law firm, yes and no. I mean, I was like way above my billable hours, but then as you know, at law firms, there's billable hour requirements. And so what
that's what I meant. As long as you're filling your quota,
right?
They really not. I'm not saying they don't care at all. Like they don't want to. They still want to see you. They want to make sure they see your face occasionally.
Oh, right.
But, you have a lot more leeway if you're killing your quotas. Yeah. You have a lot more leeway. Period.
Right.
Salesmen get the same thing. Just so you know, Dan. Like it's the old adage in the sales world is that sales fixes all problems.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But yeah, cool. So that was an interesting transition there. And then obviously there was a transition for me to go from in-house to, back to work for a law firm. And I mean, the reason I did that was that, I began to realize, it's always like grass is greener on the other side of the fence.
Always.
You always look at the advantages, right? So when I was, working in a law firm, I was looking back to, okay, yeah, it was great when I was working at Ford Motor Company. That like I don't have to worry about like billable hours and stuff like that, But then when you go back to a company, I began to realize saying that there's politics,
not just inter-office politics, but then there's the politics of the hierarchy of the executives and the
right exactly that's what I was referring to. It's like I guess being an in-house attorney, rather than being an engineer, I just kind of do my job. I do it right and people are happy with it.
You were a pivot point.
Right. But then now when you're like you said, you're an executive in a company. Now you have to, you have to please the people. And then sometimes it's going like, okay, am I doing this because I'm trying to please, the person that's head of marketing, or am I doing this for the good of the company?
That's what I meant that's just to interrupt. That's what I meant by you became a pivot a pivotal person as the attorney, as the in-house attorney, and obviously other officers knew, and obviously, if they're very close to you, they're going to whisper in your ear one way, and then you have to decide, am I doing this because I really like Jim, or am I doing this because I think it's going to be the best thing for the company, like you said?
Right,
And that
exactly.
becomes
so
a very
always kind of that
tough
conflict.
decision.
Yeah,
yeah.
Which which I kind of think back to is like when I was a law firm, you kind of say, "This is my recommendation. Take it or leave it," and stuff like that. And then in a company now, it's not as easy as that. Because there's there's part of it too is that as an attorney in house, which I didn't mind as much, is that you're not just an attorney, you're also employee of the company, and so there's
two
always
roles.
that pressure, right? There's always that pressure saying that basically, okay, can I make this decision even though there's a high risk here? Do I want to take that risk? Which sometimes I don't mind making that decision, because I'm thinking, okay, I can take that risk because it's something that this company has to do, and then I can't just say no to everything like I can.
Well, no, and I imagine that I know, I don't even have to think about this. You've been an engineer and an attorney, so I know that you understand risk management and how to assess risk. So, everything we do from the moment we walk, hell, we don't even have to walk out of our room. Right? We don't even have to go out of our house.
You have no risk.
We could slip down the stairs. And it's riskful to walk down a flight of steps every day. Right. So there's risk in everything we do. The beautiful thing is, one of those things you learn as an attorney, both and as an engineer, is risk management.
Right.
And understand,
exactly.
so you already know how to do that.
Yeah, exactly. But it was, but then the problem is like when you're in the company now, there's pressure.
You might push more that risk
than I'm comfortable with.
You're like, look, it's here, but for you, Don, I'm gonna make it here. All right, that's what Dan's gonna do for you. I'm gonna push the needle back so it's not as riskful.
Yeah. So that's when I decided. Had some conflict with some of my bosses, and then I'm going like, okay, maybe it's time to think about going back to a law firm atmosphere, and then where I feel more comfortable in terms of what I do as an attorney, rather than being the person that's saying that, hey, we can't take this risk because it's going to be jeopardize our company, and then having to basically keep my fingers crossed.
I see it like this, Dan, and I mean this sincerely. As an in-house, you were one of the back row of chess pieces, right? You were not a pawn by any stretch, but you were one of the, really you could kind of consider yourself like the queen, if you will, if you look at it, because you could go anywhere and pretty much do anything because of the fact that you were an attorney. But you still answered to somebody, right? And that was where, but you had, what I mean by that is, then you have the bishops, the knights, and the rooks all whispering in your ear to take their way, because you're right there. And so I sincerely see you as like a queen in that. But then when you go back to a law practice, you really you take all the chess pieces away, and you're just the king of law.
Right.
Well, and usually your area, you have, generally at a practice, you have a specific area that you are the master of, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. That's what, when I was like in-house, I was kind of jealous of somewhat of my outside counsel, going like, boy, these guys, all they have to do is give the recommendation.
That's right.
But then
you've got to prove
that's all they need to do. But then
you had to give a recommendation and then prove to people why you were saying it, I imagine, many times.
Right.
Yeah. So what would you say is your proudest overall moment when you look, the one that you would say maybe your career highlight, biggest success?
Yeah,
whatever way you want to put it.
Couple successes, I would say.
Oh, if you want to mention a couple, please.
Yeah,
feel free.
The one that I probably brag about the most, I don't know if you want to say that where people.
Go ahead and brag, man. You're allowed to brag. This is it's a comfortable atmosphere.
Yeah.
No one's going to judge you. You are in a non-judging. Brag about what you've done, brother, and I'll give you a little bragging back.
Yeah, I probably look back to some of the stuff I did earlier in my careers that I can kind of look
as
back
an engineer.
That's when it was more fun. It seems like. And so I wrote a patent application actually for personal watercraft. I'm not sure if people know. Personal watercraft is basically like jet skis. Exactly.
Jet skis and anything that has a motor on the water, right?
Yeah. So this
does that cover boats? Does it cover full boats?
No, the one that I wrote about, like, actually there was, and some of the it became it was a case that was litigated quite a bit.
Right.
Afterwards.
Right. No, I get it. So this one's probably in some of the law books as a reference, right?
Right. And so it was back, when I was probably like 4 or 5 years, working at the first law firm I was at, and that continued on. I keep prosecuting a bunch of patents for the company that I worked. The patent application for was AutoCAD. So they make snowmobiles, they make ATVs.
Okay, so now I get it. So they're recreational vehicles, this like anything that's not licensed.
So they made a bunch of stuff, and so back then I was doing a litigation for AutoCAD that was dealing with snowmobiles. This is budget for snowmobiles. And then they asked me, going like, "Hey Dan, I understand that you write patent applications also. We have this issue here, because back then there was, the way a personal watercraft works is that the steering is done by the thrust. So basically there's not a rudder in a way,
right,
like a boat does, and so you basically turn the thrust rather, when you turn the throttle. And then when you turn the throttle, it puts out a thrust, and then that's how it turns. Is that you turn basically the direction of the jet of the water coming out of the watercraft.
If I may, I just want to make sure, because I've always understood it, and I think I just want to explain it back to you, make sure I understand. But it literally is called a jet ski because water is sucked in through the front, propelled out the back, and that's how you not only get propel, the propulsion itself, but that then mechanism is at the front and simply turning to give you the ability to turn left and right.
Actually, it's the back of the boat.
It still is in the back. Okay.
It's the back of the boat, and then basically direction of where the jet, the water
right. You change the trajectory of the jet stream to turn yourself.
Right, exactly. So there's not a rudder like a regular will, but it's really turning,
but there is still a mechanism that is physically turning. There's still a mechanism that physically turns in order to give you that change of direction.
Exactly. Yeah. So kind of like yaw's the boat, I guess. Like I'm
right
for people who's familiar with how that works. But then so back then they had a lot of product liability litigation, because what happens is that you have to have thrust in order to turn, because that's how you you can turn the direction of the jet, but there's no propulsion. It doesn't turn because there's no water pushing it. And so what happens is that a lot of people, when they were driving their personal watercraft or riding it, they come up to a barrier or something else and they panic, and so they turn the steering, but then they let go of the throttle. And so when they do that, nothing happens. They just keep going straight because there's no propulsion.
Right. If you stop propelling it, then you're not going to turn. You're just going to
keep going the momentum
at that speed for a little bit.
Right. And so there were, when I was working with AutoCAD, they said there were not tons, but I mean there were a lot of litigation, product liability litigation that's going on because of that system. But that's a system that everyone uses back then. Yamaha uses that, Honda uses that, everyone uses that, right? And so basically they're trying to determine, how are we going to fix this problem, and so they said, "Oh, Dan, next time you're up here, I want to show you something." And so I went there, next, because I go there periodically, for litigation and stuff like that, because they were, for the snowmobile litigations and things like that. And then they showed me this personal watercraft, and then that's actually kind of funny because it was like, they're up in Minnesota, so it's like freezing temperature, and it was probably, I'll say November timeframe, so it's not snowing yet, but I mean Minnesota gets cold early, so they're going like, say, hey, Dan, you want to go on the boat, like personal watercraft down the lake out there? I'm like, I'm not going out there. It's freezing. Tell me how it works, And so basically they have this proximity switch. And so that way, if you turn a certain amount, then it pulses and puts out, pulses of water.
To turn quicker.
So even if you let go of the throttle, if it senses that the wheels, that the steering is turned, or pulse the water, so that way you get a little bit of thrust, so it can be able to turn at that point.
Right.
And so like I worked with them quite a bit. The different inventors. We worked on the claims, and so we filed an application for it. And then it was really cool. Cool invention. And then I didn't really hear.
Well, because it's also saving. I imagine that there's people that lives are saved because of this. Because
right. I mean, that's the whole idea.
Right. The whole idea is to lower the liability of the product, make it more enjoyable, and less people get hurt,
right,
or possibly die.
Right. Exactly. And so I thought it was a really cool invention.
That's awesome.
And then,
did you get any awards or anything like that for that? Just out of curiosity.
What happened was that, actually, I know there's a couple government agencies were very interested in it, and so they were talking about saying, hey, like we might want to make this a standard, that the watercraft has to be able to turn, even if
when the throttle is let go
of the throttle, right? And so
which really makes sense. Like, I mean, people are used to doing that with boats forever, right?
Because
if you have the wheel turn and you let go, down, you still turn,
and then it still turns because there's a rudder in the back,
right? Exactly.
And so at the time, like I left, I left being law firm atmosphere, so I was no longer, I had a bunch of patents that issued for AutoCAD on this area, and then like I know there were some companies, that contacted me, because my name's on the patent,
right? Of course, right? You're part of the.
That I was involved in terms of.
No, I get it. Just so you know, I meant to tell you, Dan, I actually have a patent myself, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Right. So list the name of the law firm, but if they look in the patent office, they know who the attorney that worked on this. And so we had, so I had like different companies call me, major companies. Name now.
That's awesome.
Contact me saying that, hey, like, how do we get a license for this?
I'm assuming you probably got some additional business due to that.
We got. Not necessarily.
Well, I mean, like you as an attorney, maybe somebody using you for something. I have to believe somebody used you for something after you. I mean, dude, that's a pretty, excuse my French, but that's a pretty badass thing, because you took something that was a major problem and turned it around. That's not just spinning it, that's fixing it and making sure that less people get hurt.
Right.
And
so it was technology wise, I thought it was one of the cooler technology I worked on. But then soon after that, I, basically, I said, you got to talk to somebody at AutoCAD, for licenses, stuff like that. I'm not.
I get it, because you worked. Okay, so you can only do so much in the sense
right.
You had to
so
pass it off.
you had to talk to them and get their approval.
But it did give you notoriety.
So I knew what some of the stuff that AutoCAD was kind of thinking. They're thinking about, saying that, hey, if we're to do this, and maybe. We can package it as something else, right? So I said, okay, that you got to negotiate that with AutoCAD,
right?
I'm not the right person to negotiate this stuff. But then I went, like I mentioned, I went in house, and so I went to Accenture, and then later I went to Tata. Tata.
What was that second one?
Tata Communications. Tata is it's an Indian company. I'm not
Tata.
sure with them. Yeah. TATA. So they're pretty big. They're like a GE kind of thing.
Okay, just over in India, I get it, but that's
but a bunch of different.
A billion people over there are close to it, so
right. So I think they're like actually the largest company in India.
Wow.
And I worked on their I was the chief IP counsel for the telecom group. But then I think that was when like one of my previous partner called me and said, "Oh, just let you know that patent's being litigated now." So they're probably going to contact you. I told them saying that, hey, this is, Dan is not working here anymore. You have to go find him. So they probably looked me up and found out that I was in the house attorney and didn't want to get me involved or something like that. But then that patent actually was highly litigated. It went up to like the federal circuit. For people listening, the federal circuit is kind of like our Supreme Court for the
right
groups. So I went up there a couple times. It was it also was, basically, I think I went through PTAB, which is the patent office, or the group of the patent office, which determined the validity of the patent now. And so I went through PTAB, and they found out that that there's a valid patent, and then there's not, now there's like a big thing with patents is like whether it's a patentable subject matter or not. So we went through that, it passed that, and then also they sued Bombardier on it, and it turned out to be, I don't recall how much the damages were. I think it's like close to $200 million of damages they received from Bombardier for that particular patent, And so it was kind of fun in the sense that, also, in addition to, doing things like, this web, the podcast, I lecture at PLI, quite a few times.
I bet that's fun.
And then during that time, there was like that patent actually came up a bunch of times.
Well, yeah, I would imagine.
And so it was like they used it as an example.
I mean, why wouldn't you, dude? I mean, I would imagine some people want you there to hear and understand how you did that, so they can apply it.
Right.
To...
Oh, actually, they didn't know that I was the attorney that prosecuted it. I was there. I was actually there talking about some other cases, and then they actually bring that up like a couple of times. They bring up that case because. That case also involved later on, there's within patent law, there's, if you were to license that patent to a company, that, there should be a marking saying that it was, that company has to mark saying that, like I licensed the patent, for the,
for this use,
for my product and stuff like that. So it's kind of like, it's supposed to give people warning about saying this is a patented product, right?
Right. It's kind of like a disclosure, really.
Right. Exactly. And so there's, so during that time, that's like last year, 2 years ago, in addition to, I went through this whole round of litigating whether there's infringement, whether the patent is valid. And then now after it's then they're bring up the defense, Bombardier bring up defense, saying that it was, it was licensed to Honda, which I kind of knew that was going to happen because, I spoke to Honda before, back when I was a law firm, we were processing this patent. But then it was licensed to Honda, but then Honda did not put down that it was licensed. It was a licensed patent, and so deal. Now, they bring up that case. So that patent brought, has a lot of intricate details that keep coming up whenever I
imagine that you're going to continue to see a few more over the next 10 years. I would imagine.
Right, it could be. There could be more stuff coming out of those hands, and so now it's like it's actually kind of interesting that that I was one that wrote the original patent. Some of the people was
going a piece of history, man.
Right, and so so cool. It was kind of interesting that I was like, I think at another PLI conference, and then somebody said, oh, you know what? We actually had the guy that actually wrote this patent mentioned, here before. And I was sitting there, or actually, I think I was on the phone, and somebody said, yeah, that was Dan Ho. He's on the phone right now.
That's really cool, man. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So what are a few of your daily rituals that you find most important? Like in a typical day, give me like, 3 of the things that you're guaranteed. If you want to get more, that's fine. I'm just giving you kind of an idea, but give me some of those things like from the time you get up that you have to do that you feel like are part of your success.
Oh, boy, that's an interesting question because I think it varies, day to day, obviously, and I'm sure you probably hear that from a lot of people. I'm not sure if I have any particular ritual. I mean, I think I kind of go through something very similar to what most people do, right? I kind of, check my emails, and I mean, on a day where there's not much going on, I just check my emails, respond back to emails and things like that. And then, I mentioned about saying that it varies a lot because the type of work we do, right? So, let's say there's something that's urgent. I know I have to get up in the morning, and then I have to prepare getting ready to, look at this agreement or something like that, and get that out by the end of the day. And so I just hurry up and do whatever I can, and then get that work done. And same thing, like if like I still do litigation, not so much pen litigation because I work for a smaller firm now,
Right.
but I still do litigation in terms of breach of contract litigation, which can be handled by like one or two attorneys. So do that kind of work. And so, like, there's times where I know I have to prepare a brief or, get ready for a hearing or whatever like that. So it kind of varies day to day in terms of, what a day is, because there really is no typical day, I think.
No, I completely
For attorney. I think there's
the part of your typical day is that it's non-typical.
Right, exactly. No, it's probably more typical when I was in-house.
Right, because that was more of that 9 to 5
Exactly.
style.
There's more of a typical day. There's a lot of times, we have like set meetings that I would meet with people. I would look at my calendar saying that, hey, like 4, whatever, 10 o'clock, I have a
Right.
meeting with the lead of this group to talk about what they're doing. I have just, so there's all these meetings that's pretty much set. And then, like, obviously there's exceptions, right? There's sometimes there's the big matter, then you come up and it takes the whole day. But there's much more structured, I think, in a company. And then when you're in a law firm, especially a small law firm that I'm at now, it's just, there is, like you said, that, there is no typical day. And then it depends on what's going on. I'm obviously every day I have to check my email. In the
Right.
morning.
So the only typical part is you check that email and then plan out your day.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. No, I get it. So here, this is the last question, just because we're getting close on time here. So it's a two-parter. What I'm looking for is maybe one or two. If you have more, you can obviously name more of it. Who would you consider a mentor, and what would you consider the best piece of advice that they gave you?
Oh boy, that's I would say my mentor would be the person I started off my legal career with. I'm not sure if you can say his name, but Bob Jambor. He was.
Yes, please say his name.
Oh yeah, so Bob Jambor, he's retired now, I believe. We still keep in touch. So right. I actually, during my law firm career, before I went in-house, I was at 4 different law firms. But actually, right. I was with him the whole time. So he was, so I started working with him when I was, at the original law firm, which he was one of the named partners, of the law firm. And then that law firm broke up, and then so we formed our own law firm, the two of us. So we had Jambor and Ho, which a 2-person law firm, and then later on we joined Jenner Block. Which is a mega law firm, and then but we still kind of work together quite a bit,
right?
Even though I probably worked more on Jenner's clients than I did with his. Then we
Understood.
went to Light Void, and so my first 4 law firms, which took over a little bit over 10 years. I mean, he was my mentor, and I worked with him during that whole time.
Which
and
is even when nice that you got to continue to work with him no matter what. Like the situation just kept allowing y'all to continue to work together.
Right, exactly. So so even though we moved law firm to law firm during that time, I mean, for various reasons. I mentioned about one time it was basically the law firm was going to merge with another law firm, and then we decided saying, hey, we'd rather be on our own, so we did that.
Right.
And then we decided saying that, hey, that it's just too much work trying to run a 2-man law firm.
Now it's time to merge.
Yeah. So he was my mentor the whole time, during that time. And I mean, there was a lot of things, I think, that he taught me that during that time. I mean, obviously there's the technical aspects of it,
right?
Because I came in, I worked as an engineer. I never worked in a law firm before. I mean,
taught you a lot of the ins and outs of being an attorney.
Exactly. So actually, the things I remember when I just joined his law firm, he told me saying that, hey, Daniel, the first 2 years we're not going to make a dime off of you. If anything, you're going to cost us money during the first 2 years,
right?
Which I think it's very different than I would say I saw at like a large law firm like Jenner Block. They throw you in there. They try, they kind of mentor as much as they can, but then you have to bill your 2,000 hours.
Right, but they want you to be productive and making money for them.
Right, exactly.
In the first year, really, by the end of the first freaking quarter, you better show signs that you're going to be a moneymaker for it.
Right, exactly. So I mean, you have to. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do, but you have to bill your hours, and then they can bill all that time. So during that time, when I don't want to say bad things about large law firm, but then I mean that's the way
it's different scenarios, man. You really have like 4 different types of law firms, from the single solitary solo practice all the way up to the giant mega practice.
Right. Period. Exactly. And so basically his point, which I think is true. I mean, I even practice now, is that, it's not so much the money, it's really providing good service to the client. And sometimes, you have to like not bill every second, because, like basically at Jenner, like if I'm doing litigation, I'm billing pretty much every second I'm working, even if I'm doing legal research, even if it's a dead end, if I spent 5 hours trying to find something out, it's a dead end, I'm still going to bill 5 hours for it,
Right. But that's legit. That's still legit though.
Right. It's legit. I mean, it's actually spent the time. But then his view and that, and so like in terms of why, him saying that, hey, we're not going to make any money off of you the first couple of years, because if you're not that productive, we're going to cut your time,
Right.
And so, if it's something that should have took 2 hours, if you were really efficient and found out what you have to, you could have done it 2 hours, but you took a whole day doing it. We're only going to bill 2 hours, because the client's going to come back and say, why the guy took 8 hours to figure this out or something like that. They're
not going to be cool with the time.
Client friendly in terms of being at an atmosphere like that. And that's the thing that, I kind of carried over, which probably made me, make less money than I could have when I was at General Block, because, some of the stuff sometimes I don't bill my whole time, which, they're telling me to, but I'm going like, okay, like I really, especially like the clients that we brought over, that who are familiar with who I am, it's a relationship with the client in a way is sometimes much more important than just making hours. Most money that you can
if I may say and interject here, if you leave off a couple hours every week to continue to have me for a client as 10, 20 years, what makes the most sense? Because if you overbill me or bill me when you really shouldn't have, like morally, it wasn't right, well, then obviously I'm going to eventually catch on to that and feel offended.
Right.
And most likely leave you.
Exactly. It's not even morally right. Because I mean, morally, if I spend, people's argument is, well, if you spend the time, you should bill them for it,
Right.
And same thing, but the thing is, it's like, if you nickel and dime someone, they're gonna, like he said, okay, so it's
they're gonna go somewhere else.
But they're gonna know that you nickel and dime them. Like basically, sometimes they, like attorneys, we write down what we did during that time. You write down, even sometime I know that we had some client back then that basically, we bill them for like paralegal time and stuff like that. Because we're going like, we have to pay our paralegal, but then like the paralegal might put down 15 minutes to docket something, right? And then which is legit, but then the client might be like, oh, like, wait a minute, isn't that your overhead? Like, why are you billing me?
Where do you take some of the costs of running a business?
Right. So sometimes it's a little, so it's basically, you have to kind of look at it in terms of, is it more important to keep this client and keep them happy?
Yes.
Even though I might not make the instant, gratification of being able to make a couple $1,000.
Well, to me, it's just like you said, you're not nickel and diming them. So you might lose a few dollars every month, but you're keeping a client for 10, 20 years that ultimately is going to be spending a lot more. And when you do need to bill them properly, or you need to be like, hey, we spent a ton of time on this and I can't not bill you this time, they're not going to have a problem with it either, Dan.
Right.
And you do occasionally come and say, man, just to give a for instance, like I would say, something I would feel like comes from you would be like, hey, we spent like 15 hours. I really want to bill you that, but I can't bill you anything less than 12. I mean, it's what we did.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
But that might be well over what they're normally used to seeing, but they're going to be like, hey, we understand. Thanks for giving us, thanks for cutting us a break on the 3 hours, you know?
Right. Exactly.
It's lifetime customer. I consider it customer loyalty, customer support, and how to keep a customer for life.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So, hey, thanks so much for your time today, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It was
great.
A lot of fun.
I will tell you this the same way that I tell other people that I've really engaged well with. Why don't we think about reaching out to you in about a year or so and doing like a follow up and see how the firm is doing and how you're doing and see where you're at. Never know what's going to happen between now and then, right?
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. Thank you again for studying.
No, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Li-Chung Daniel Ho. And let me just say the name of I don't have it in front of me here just for a moment. I'm going to say it. It's Resolute Legal is who.
Right. So that's the firm I'm at now.
Yes, that's the firm that you're at now. I just wanted to mention their name before I forgot to. That's
all. Okay, great. Thank you so much for
thanks so much. This. And with that said, I will just sign off real quick by saying thanks everyone for tuning in to, again, another episode of 15 Minutes. Technically, the name of it is 15 Minutes, Share Your Voice. And we heard Dan's voice today, and it was very cool, very interesting stories. And it's I love how, everybody, and I'll say this, Dan, I really believe that everybody has a piece of history. They just don't realize it sometimes, because we touch everybody. And I believe in 6 degrees of separation. So, even sometimes the people that think they're not making a decision, they have,
Right.
And I'll give you just a real, for instance, there had to be a lot of bad accidents where the thing didn't turn. Well, each one of those bad accidents had a piece of making you the person who could, of helping you, be able to create the patent that needed to be in place. Mm-hmm. So, think of it that way. That's how it all works. So anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. We will be back again next week. And with that said, have a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening to 15 Minutes. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.